Rima, the other talking point, and on Editor's Playbook, we picked this up yesterday, which is direct flights between India and China. And essentially, if you see the momentum of events, the way it's panning out, seems like both sides are taking steps to normalize relations, India and China, right? And that's great news because eventually that may lead, easing of restrictions on those precious rare earth magnets, etc., right? So that's great news, and it's happening after 5 years. But is there a flip side to it, is the question, which, is just food for thought, but something that I wanted to put out for our viewers. And these are the four things first up, right? Will Chinese companies be allowed to operate with much more freedom in India? That's point number one, as these ties normalize. Second, for most of the EMS, FMEG, capital goods companies, etc., China plus one was not really a big factor for why they did well. What actually helped them, and this is point number three, is import substitution, right? Companies here making what you could import earlier, so substituting those imports, helped by schemes like PLI, etc., and restricting import of Chinese brands, OEMs, etc., restrictions on Chinese companies. So it was not China plus one. In a way it was, but not in the, the purest sense of that term, but it was, these other factors which helped. So if restrictions on Chinese companies as normalized, it's not as if China is going to agree to normalize ties if they don't get access to the market, right? They're the largest producer for pretty much everything on out there in the world economy. So they want access. That's essentially what we can offer. So will easing of restrictions on sourcing from China hurt Indian players? That is the question that I'm asking. And, just a couple of areas where this perhaps shows up. And these are all, and the reason why this is important is because these are all, high valuation sectors. Typically between 70 to 100 times earnings is where most of these, a lot of these sectors trade at. EMS, for example, and the names come up on your screen. Power equipment on the generation side, names like BHEL, L&T, Thermax. If you remember 10, 15 years ago, Chinese import of power equipment, quality aside, was a big factor. And when that stopped and restrictions were put in terms of use of local content, etc., these stocks actually reacted quite favorably. So will there be strict regulated entry if it is allowed? We'll have to see. Power equipment on the transmission and distribution side. Well established that China has got huge capacities here, and the companies will come up on the screen. Again, these are all very, very richly priced sectors in that sense. And of course, you've got lots of emerging sectors like motors, EV chargers, solar inverters, smart meters, and so on and so forth. So it's just a question out there, which is, even as ties normalize and as great news, etc., you're not going to be able to immediately, at least till you build up manufacturing capacities, be able to sell into that market. US is the consumer, China is the producer, and that's the reality of it. So we'll see how this is done. I'm sure the government, of course, is very mindful of all of this to protect the local industry with whatever it can do in terms of measures, etc.